I was watching it do household chores. So for example, frying an egg. So for a robotic system to pick up an egg, break the egg, put it into a frying pan, fry the egg, and then use a spatula to take the egg out, put it on a plate. These are things that I never dreamed I'd see a robot do for another 10 years, but machine learning has really accelerated this. And I know that Amazon are using similar machine learning on robots to watch people do their work in the workplace and take this parcel from here to here. So taking that into account, when you look at this for pharmaceutical manufacturing, it's got great potential.
Welcome to the Digital Manufacturer Podcast, your frontline source for all things digital transformation in manufacturing. I'm your host, Mark Flynn, and I'm here to guide you through the evolving landscape of manufacturing. In each episode, we'll uncover the stories of innovation that are defining the industry, offering insights and strategies that help to drive growth and efficiency. Join us as we speak to thought leaders and visionaries who share their journeys and the lessons they've learned along the way. So let's dive into today's episode and discover what the future holds for the digital manufacturer. Hi Rob, welcome to the Digital Manufacturer Podcast. How are you today?
Good, thanks Mark. How are you?
I'm brilliant, thanks. And I have to say, it's an absolute honor to have a Manufacturing 100 alumni on the show. So thank you for making the time to join us.
It's an honor to be one, to be honest.
Brilliant. Well, look, I'm conscious it's late on a Friday. So again, thanks for coming on. But I wanted to start a conversation just about understanding a little bit more about your career and how you got to where you are today. I was checking my notes prior to this call, and I understand that you started your career in media animation and corporate films. Is that right?
I came a very weird way to where I am now. To summarize, it all started at university. So at university, I studied computer animation. For my internship, I was with a film studio that was doing a lot of 3D work on TV adverts. When I left university, I went straight into a producer role with that TV studio and spent a lot of time working on set, but also in back rooms with 3D animators. And that led to about 10 years of freelance work in that world. And then one of my clients got in touch and asked me if I'd be interested in working on a team building immersive virtual reality training modules for the military. And to be honest with you, I was getting a bit jaded with the entertainment industry, and I jumped at the chance and I got to work with some really interesting educational psychiatrists and people who were ex-military themselves and got into the real pedagogical world of using 3D immersive tech for training people. So I did that for 4 years, led a team of coders and developers and artists, and worked on some great projects for the UK military. And then I was headhunted by a recruitment agency who asked me if I wanted to join Thermo Fisher using my skill set for something different. And at the time, the pandemic had just hit, and I felt like there was a really good opportunity for me to use my skills for the common good. And I jumped at the chance. So I joined Thermo Fisher. I was really interested in life sciences anyway. And it was really interesting, actually. So I got to work on some really interesting projects. But when I went in, I was expecting to work mainly on immersive training stuff, but my skill set overlapped a lot with what was going on the shop floor when it came to data collection and all that kind of good stuff. So I started to work more and more with automotive engineers on projects locally and globally. And as you know yourself, a lot of these fields, they overlap. The more you work in this world, the more you see the different uses. So it was great to touch base with people working in the industry and do some creative thinking and join some of those dots. So yeah, not the usual path to someone in my position, but it's been very enjoyable, I must say.
I think you make such a good point just in terms of how diverse backgrounds contribute so much to the modern digital transformation agenda, particularly in the creative arts space, particularly in designing those augmented reality or virtual reality experiences and using immersive technology for the likes of training and risk modification. So it's not a space I know well, but I certainly know that over the last 10 or 15 years, particularly creative people from the arts, dare I said, have been moving more and more in technology as technology has been driving that way. So what's been your kind of main focus at Thermo Fisher in the digital transformation space. Could you give our listeners a kind of idea of what sort of big initiatives a company like Thermo might be working on?
So I kind of alluded to one just now, which was the immersive training piece. So there's been a lot of exploration and R&D in Thermo Fisher in collaboration with Microsoft and a few other smaller companies. So if I speak about the Microsoft piece first, we were one of the early adopters for the Microsoft HoloLens. So for anybody who's not familiar with that, it's like virtual reality, but you can actually see the world around you, and it overlays 3D models and information onto objects around you and that kind of thing. So we were using that initially for remote assist. So that means you could take your HoloLens, put it on, and join a Teams call. So if you can imagine joining a Teams call where you can see the person in a user interface in front of you there, and they can open documents in front of you over here, and then you can look at what you're working on. So say if I was working on this as a piece of equipment, they'd be able to put an arrow here or here or here to tell me where to focus my attention. So working on a complex circuit board, for example, them saying the red wire, no, not that red wire, no, the one on the left, no, the other one on the left, they can actually overlay an arrow onto the real world and say, that's exactly where you need to focus. It was quite interesting. And you would move around an object that's in front of you and see something that they'd overlaid on top of it. So for us during the pandemic, this was particularly useful for us. So the factory I was working in was going through some aggressive expansion at the time to make us ready for the COVID vaccine production. And we were engaging with stakeholders and vendors in Italy, Germany, lots of people in America. At the beginning of the pandemic, they could travel to us and join us. But as the pandemic unfolded, it was increasingly difficult and sometimes impossible for them to come to site. So for us to have this kind of technology to help us engage with those people was actually critical to the success of the project. So that was one use case. And then the other way we were using the HoloLens was to train our operators a production line that we hadn't built yet. So we had a production line that was the mirror image of another production line that we had in our site in Greenville, North Carolina, in the States. So in North Carolina, they built a digital replica of the line that operators could walk around. And when we talk about production line for building injectable products, it's incredibly complex. There's a lot of moving parts, I'm sure you can imagine. And to be able to engage with a production line real scale through the HoloLens, they were able to firstly familiarize themselves with a machine that didn't exist yet, contextualize the written word instructions with the real thing. There were some parts of the machine that they could interact with, so they could practice building the line and taking the line apart. It was good to a certain extent. They couldn't really appreciate which parts were heavy and which parts were light, or some parts of it were really good and some parts of it just didn't work very well. So they were able to do that through the HoloLens too. And then the other thing they were experimenting with was something called HoloLens Guides, and Microsoft gave us early access to that. So Microsoft Guides is a program that allows you to build digital work aids to help you with your day-to-day work. So we take the phone again as an example. You'd be able to put on the HoloLens, scan a QR code here, and that would launch instructions in the written word in front of you, but also overlay arrows or pointy fingers or other 3D sort of graphics that would help you find your way around to the exercise that you were trying to carry out. So we tried it. To be honest with you, at the Swindon site, that didn't really work out because of the protective gear and gowning that people were already wearing. The HoloLens became quite cumbersome over the top of that. The other thing that we came up against was the limitations of the hardware. So it's a great proof of concept, the HoloLens, but in real world work, it's quite heavy. The battery life is quite short, especially if you're relying on Wi-Fi to bring everything in. And it's also, dare I say it, not very reliable when it comes to logging in. So the first time you put it on, you log in, it scans your iris. So every time you put the HoloLens on, you're in this Iron Man world. It recognizes your iris and goes, "Hello, Robert, welcome to HoloLens. What would you like to do today?" But then sometimes it doesn't work and you have to re-log in. So if you imagine you're in a busy environment, such as production, and you try this once, doesn't work. All right, I've got to go back in, I've got to log in. If this happens to you 2 or 3 times, you're just going to dismiss it and you're going to go, do you know what? I'm just going to pick up the standard operating procedure and read it because this thing is costing me too much time. But I think it's a great proof of concept. And as new things come into the market, we're probably going to see eventually over the next 2 or 3 years, headsets that are more like the common glasses that are of a similar weight that will overcome some of those issues that the early adopters like the HoloLens encountered. So yeah, it's been interesting.
And do you think that type of technology in conjunction with kind of modern robotics is going to mean more people are going to work from home? Because traditionally in factories, you expect people who are on the floor to be on the floor, which kind of causes a recruitment challenge. But with that type of technology, do you think you might be able to employ wider outside of your locale for factories to get specialist workers who are working from home on a HoloLens using robotics to kind of drive a production line? Like, is that science fiction, or do you think that's a near reality?
I think it is a near reality, and it's getting closer, not by the year, but by the month, the way things are accelerating with, you take the Google ALOHA robotics project.
I've not seen that. What is the ALOHA project?
So the Google ALOHA, they're working in conjunction with some universities in America, and it doesn't look very pretty, but it's able to watch people do things and use machine learning to mimic them. So the way they demoed it recently was to show it. So it's basically, it looks like a table on wheels, and it's got some arms, and it looks not very great, but I was watching it do household chores. So for example, frying an egg. So for a robotic system to pick up an egg, break the egg, put it into a frying pan, fry the egg, and then use a spatula to take the egg out, put it on a plate. These are things that I never dreamed I'd see a robot do for another 10 years, but machine learning is really accelerating this. And I know that Amazon are using similar machine learning on robots to watch people do their work in the workplace and take this parcel from here to here. So taking that into account, when you look at this for pharmaceutical manufacturing, it's got great potential, because the biggest problem for pharmaceutical manufacturing is contaminants entering the area, and the main culprit of those, the human being. So is that going to put people out of a job? No, but what it can do is take the people away from the area. And what we're experimenting with, and I know other companies are doing this as well, is using virtual reality headsets and controllers to control robots that are inside the area to perform tasks. So if you could take people out of the area and they're doing it in other parts of the building, there's no reason for them to actually be in the building even. They could be anywhere in the world performing these tasks via these robots. And I would predict the next step after that is the robots are learning what you're doing and actually going ahead and carrying out these tasks themselves. In something as safety critical as producing medicines that are injected into somebody's body, I think we're a long way off from regulating that and making that an everyday practice. But if you're making simpler products, then I don't see that being too far off, really.
Yeah. I think the reality of it is the robots and the automation take over the kind of manual, mundane tasks, and the humans set about making the robots better, or at the very least, quality assuring what's coming off the line. But I mean, I agree with you in terms of it's not a matter of years, it's a matter of months. I mean, I don't know whether you've seen the humanoid robot from Figure.ai that has just been integrated with OpenAI's AGI. There's a lot of eyes in that. But it is scarily good in terms of its motor function and its dexterity and the things that it can do, and now its perception of the world. For the SME manufacturer, is cost going to be prohibitive here in the short term, medium term, long term? Or do you think this is something that a medium-sized manufacturer could avail of like next year?
Depends which level of robotics you're looking at. So the OpenAI project you just spoke about, I know that their goal is to become affordable quickly. But for smaller manufacturers, I think that's going to be a few years off. But it comes down to supply and demand, doesn't it? For the iPhone, for example, started off pretty expensive and it's gone down in price and become more and more effective and more common. And the iPhone 1 wasn't very good, really. You know, iPhone 3 or 4 was when it got to this great user experience that we know and love today. So I think it's going to be an interesting few years, but I think for the companies with smaller budgets, where it's not going to be at that level that quick. But then there are smaller robotic solutions and sensor triggered sort of solutions that are affordable right now. And if you go to the trade shows this year and you think the manufacturer in the summer, I think we're going to see a few revolutionary trade stands there that are going to be able to offer some solutions at prices that people possibly didn't expect they could afford.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons we got going with Rubik was that we noticed the cost of enterprise technology coming down significantly with the advent of SaaS, software as a subscription. So you no longer need to spend 18, 24 months putting in a large scale ERP. You can actually buy the capabilities of an ERP piecemeal and integrate them together for a low monthly cost. So I think the likelihood is, from a robotics and an advanced robotics standpoint, at some point in the future, we see that similar type of model come in and allow SMEs to compete at that level with some of the larger manufacturers. Is AI going to take everyone's job then? What's your thoughts on that? That's something that we hear often.
Well, it's a tricky one to answer because, again, that's something that's evolving at a pace that nobody expected it to evolve. If you take the text to video generative AI, so last year you could type in, I think the popular one was Will Smith eating a pizza, and it was just an absolute mess. Pizza or spaghetti, something like that. And it was horrific. It was horrifying to watch. And then the latest offering from OpenAI is incredible. You keep putting in mammoths marching through the winter tundra, and it is photoreal CGI. And it's like, I didn't expect to see that in less than a year, that sort of progression. But the job side of things is an interesting one. I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, is let AI do some of the heavy lifting of the tedious work so the humans can get on with the more value add work that is being missed by doing this work. And I think I would go more towards augmented intelligence than artificial intelligence. So it's augmenting our work and giving us the time we need to do the value add work. And like industry I'm in currently, there's a hell of a lot of paperwork. There's a hell of a lot of administrative work to get the product to a point that is regulatory standard, satisfactory for us to put in front of an auditor. So we're already starting to use not so much AI, but Power Automate and those sorts of Microsoft tools to take information from one place and fill out forms. Stuff that would have taken people 3 hours to do can now be done in a few minutes. So I think it will possibly replace some jobs, but definitely add more time for value add work and more efficiency in the workplace, definitely.
I think that's the key, value add work, particularly in a manufacturing environment, and particularly those manufacturers that profess to be proponents of lean or disciples of lean. And you go in and there's so much manual paperwork and manual processes kicking around. Really what digital technology should be there to provide is the removal of that non-value add activity, double keying information into multiple systems, writing stuff out on paper on the factory floor as opposed to using barcode or scanning or digital forms. And to your point as well, using Power Automate to connect business processes together in an automated fashion. I think those are all real use cases and augmented use cases that any manufacturer should be looking at today. Is in the back of my mind is just coming back to the start of our conversation around the Microsoft HoloLens and the augmented reality. One of the big complaints that we have from a lot of our customers is the time taken to train operatives once they've found them. Is the HoloLens and that kind of scenario modeling solution, although you did say it was a bit expensive and a bit clunky to use on the factory floor, but from a training perspective, did it pay dividends?
Yes and no. I think what it did reveal is when it comes to this sort of technology and this kind of thinking, companies, especially large companies, have got to be willing to fall forward and fail. So it was an aggressive rollout across the network, and there were successes in some areas of work and failures in others. But what I took on from it personally is that you can sometimes leap too far forward too quickly. So what I favoured instead of that to help the success of our company and help our operators and staff achieve their goals is tablet-based solutions. So we've gone for Swipe Guides, which is a SaaS service, really quick to implement, really quick to build digital work aids. And the user experience is much more joyful because I'm not having to teach them how to use a tablet or a phone because everyone does that anyway. We all live in a YouTube world where I've got a passion for old vehicles. I've got a 30-year-old camper van that I enjoy working on. That's my antidote to the digital world, is my analog vehicle. And when I want some help with that, I go to YouTube and I watch an expert tell me how to replace the horn because it's not working that week, and where is my wash bottle, and all these other kind of things. That's how most of us are used to getting our information. And I think I read a statistic lately that YouTube is the second largest search engine now, because that's where we go for our information, and people want to watch other people do what they do, and you can't really beat that. So we're using that in our site now, and it's picked up really quickly. It's almost caught fire as soon as one person made one. When I showed it to someone else in another department, they're like, I want that because I can think there's a safety critical activity that I really need people to get right and feel confident in. There's an activity that we only do every 4 years, and it's really hard to capture that expertise. What we're also dealing with on our site, and this is common across the manufacturing industry, is the Grey Tsunami. So we have engineers retiring, taking really important knowledge with them. If you take my site, for example, it was built in the late 60s, operational in the early 70s, and a lot of our engineers who are leaving joined us as apprentices at the age of 15, 16 years old, which was a common thing back then. And they know every single moving part of that building. They know exactly where to elbow a boiler when it isn't working. They know exactly all the little secret tips and tricks that you don't really get written down anywhere because they're in someone's head. So we're able to capture that on video, turn it into bite-sized steps, put a QR code on that machine. So when the next engineer comes along, they can just scan that QR code and get that information really quickly. And what that also does as a knock-on effect is deflect from the hero culture that we get a lot in engineering departments, where there's only one person who can fix that, and they'll have to come in and get paid extra for coming in the middle of the night because they're the only person who can fix this thing, and they're not going to pass that knowledge on. So we're kind of forcing a change in culture by capturing that information digitally and making it readily available to other people.
It's such a great point, and I want to just make sure that everyone got that. So you have QR codes on machines which can be read by tablets, which then deliver content, a video on how to maintain it or how to respond to a particular error. And that content has been built by engineers that have been in the business for multiple years who are approaching retirement, because it's the first time I've heard the term Grey Tsunami, so I'm going to steal it. But it's a very real thing. And you always hear about the fact that there's one or two people in a factory, in a company that have been there since they were a young person, and they know how everything works and nobody else knows how it works. So I think the time is now certainly to be using tools like swipe guides. Yeah, I've seen the likes of Scribe and some other tools for recording SOPs, whether it is on the factory floor or even in the back office. They are quick to use. They are super valuable. And not only do they remove the risk of the Grey Tsunami, they also remove the risk of key people leaving. Like you see that all the time. People choose to leave their employer and move to somewhere else. And as soon as they've left, no one understands how they do the things that they're doing. So I'm interested to know documentation and write-ups of user guides. In my experience, it's always forgotten about as part of any implementation. But based on what we're just saying here now, perhaps it's probably one of the most valuable things that you do once you deliver a digital transformation, be it an AR system, a training system, an MES, or an ERP. What's your thoughts on that? Should people give more focus now to documenting what they've done than they have done in the past?
With regards to implementation, so for pharmaceutical specifically, it's not an easy thing to do, and there are actually a lot of regulatory hoops to jump through in order to bring something to fruition. So we have to satisfy our own auditors, our own regulatory quality staff within the company. We make drugs for the American market, so we have to satisfy the FDA. But we're based in England, so we have to satisfy the MHRA as well. But to be fair to all these regulatory agencies, they are pushing digital transformation. So it's a give and take. So when it comes to documenting all of that, then I have to, is the short answer. It's good in a way because what it does is it forces me to create not only the validation of everything that I implement, but also training material that goes with it. So, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, then people know how to use the equipment. So there are curriculars that I've set up, and there's even swipe guides that I've made for how to use and implement the swipe guide. So it all starts to dovetail within itself. Our virtual reality room that we've got at work there's actually behind that is training people how to do some of their work, but there's also training the back end of that on the instructors who come in to deliver that training. And then there's also documentation, electronic, for our IT department, global IT people as well, on how to support the hardware and software that runs it. I was actually asked to write a playbook recently for my site on all the digital stuff that I've implemented, and I thought it would be a few pages, and this thing is turning into a Bible. There's so much to it once you start thinking about it. But I think it's a really important exercise, because digital, especially SaaS stuff, it's so quick to do and easy to implement. When you really get into the weeds, there's really quite a lot going on there and quite a lot to think about.
Absolutely. And how do you build your strategy? Like, how do you choose what digital tools to implement or what opportunities to take? Is that governed from head office, or is that individual sites who are responsible for that digital transformation planning?
It's a combination of the two, really. So the partnership with Microsoft came from a global level, and that was managed globally, but they were very good in saying, here are the tools, do with them as you will. So we're a life sciences company, over 130,000 employees in 20 different countries, doing everything from gene cell therapy to manufacturing pills and injectables. So how you use the technology is up to the sites themselves. So there's that side of it. Swipe guides was more of a site-specific thing. So that was just one person in Toronto who said, here's a thing that I know is really going to help our guys. I was in collaboration with him on some other projects, and I said, that sounds really good. We'll take that on. And now from us in Toronto and Cincinnati and Swindon, running with that ourselves, that's now become a global thing. So we've influenced the global decision on that. There are other initiatives that are smaller. So we make our own apps on site. We'll test those. We use things like Power Apps, Smart Sheets, things like this to see what works and what doesn't work. Most of that is driven by need, necessity, and could we, is it going to work? Test it out. Some things work, some things don't work. And again, we'll take that back to the global team, and we have communities of practice and communities of excellence that meet up on a monthly basis. So within our own network, there's a group of people, including myself, who discuss ideas and initiatives. And then there's, across all of the life sciences departments, there's a broader reach of people who just talk about what they're doing. And some people say, well, that's a great idea, and we're going to use that. So for Swindon especially, one of the most successful projects that we've implemented is the Matterport project, whereby we were using a very common tool. It's used by all sorts of industries, but mainly by real estate, to scan our site. We've got 60 scans in total of production areas, laboratories, technical areas, engineering voids, these sorts of things. So we took that, we really ran with it, and we started to populate it with data tags that are searchable. So we could use it as a wayfinding tool, fire maps, engineering information, sampling points for our scientists, and all that kind of good stuff. But also we're able to lift from that 360-degree images and implement that into e-learning. So you can take a simple e-learning piece of software like Captivate, can actually host 360 images, and you can then start to add an extra layer of gamification to learning. So from the desktop, people can look at areas they're familiar with. Oh yeah, I work there. And now there's an interactive learning experience for asking you to identify where are the hazards, and allowing you in that safe space, the learning space, at your desktop, to learn, fail, and win. I think it works really well with young people as well who are used to gaming. There's a consequence to what you're doing straight away, rather than longer learning of reading something and then pretending you've taken it in. That you can't beat that interactive learning experience.
I love it. I mean, that whole kind of immersive training, particularly from a health and safety perspective, being trained to operate in your own area without the danger of being on the floor, is fascinating. Could you use that type of technology for moving things around on your floor and kind of scenario testing, almost like a digital twin?
Yeah, we do that actually. So, as I said, we've been through an aggressive expansion of the site, and our project engineers there's actually a really very, very simple measuring tool within Matterport. So you can use this kind of virtual tape measure. We're just using it for very simple activities like we're bringing in a new piece of washing equipment into the shop floor. Will it fit through the door? things like this that you would have. But for an engineer to figure that out, they have to go through various airlocks and decontamination processes. So going from the engineering workshop to where this place of interest is could take anything from half an hour to an hour. And then they do the work and then they have to go back out again. So now for them to just be able to open the model on their desktop, do the measurements right there, saves a hell of a lot of time. And also for them to be able to communicate with the people who are coming in to do the work on a Teams call. They can share their screen and go, this is the area here. This is how far the ceiling is from the top of this equipment. Is that going to give you enough room to come in with the equipment you're using to actually lift that equipment in? It's come to some decisions that are like, we thought we were going to have to come in and wheel something into, oh, right, okay, we're going to have to remove the roof and bring a lift and actually put equipment in that way. So it can save a hell of a lot of time, but also a lot of money, because once you start thinking like that, and our engineering staff do, you can reach decisions and save a lot of money and a lot of time.
We're just thinking about the time and stress and pressure of doing heavy machine moves or relocations, or even a lot of our customers would buy all of their machinery on the second-hand market as well. And when they're kind of bringing it to site, you can see them panicking whether it's going to fit, whether they've got the layout right. And it doesn't matter how many times you've kind of done it on paper, unless you have that kind of precise environment and you can see it in 3D, where it's going to sit, what kind of orientation does it need to take to get through the front door. I can see how to, like that Matterport, right?
Yeah.
I can see how to, like Matterport could help that, where I guess it's a LiDAR scan, is it, of the factory floor and then rendered in 3D, or?
So the Matterport Pro 3 is their latest scanner, and that is LiDAR. But for years before that, and I've been using this sort of thing for about 10 years, it's actually taking a 3D photograph and bouncing an infrared beam off of the environment around it and building a very rudimentary 3D point cloud from that. But from that, you get enough information to have a Google Street View style experience of walking through an area. But it also gives you enough information to give you accurate measurements as well. So that, they did a really clever thing by saving the cost of having to buy a LiDAR camera, which, especially 10 years ago, you were talking in the tens of thousands of pounds, to release a camera that was a $3 or $4 grand at the time, that made it accessible to their main market at the time was real estate, and make it simple enough for an estate agent to use. No offense to the estate agents out there. You didn't have to be a sort of technical genius to get the equipment working either. So I have numerous staff on my site. They work in quality compliance, engineering, labs, and they're all able to just get this equipment, take it to where they need it, and do a scan of what they need. And that gives them the information that they need to make these sorts of decisions. We've also used it for selling the site. So by having this models of every area, we're able to go to potential clients and they'll say, well, what are your labs like? And we'll go, well, we've just built state-of-the-art labs. Here's our bioburden department. Here's where we do our testing. Have a look around. And so that's been a really useful business management tool for us as well.
Yeah, even as you said that, I'm just thinking about virtual walkarounds for clients overseas, where instead of them having to come and do a site visit at that early stage, you can give them access to walk around the virtual facility and see everything that's going on. That's really fascinating. The other thing I wanted to just touch on, Rob, you mentioned it, was Power Apps. So I thought your digital strategy, or at least the approach to it, was really interesting. So you have a global top-down view that comes from Thermo Global that is fed into by a number of different sites who are out doing research on the latest technology and trends. But you also have the ability to affect change quickly using Power Apps, which is a low-code tool, as and when you see the opportunity on site. I'm really interested in your view about how SMEs could leverage low-code technology more, because there is a reticence, and rightly so, to develop their own software because it's difficult to maintain. They can't find people with the skills. But low-code is really changing the game. It's not like software development anymore. So what would be your guidance to SMEs who might want to avail of low-code technology to deliver innovation quickly on site?
The playing field's really changed over the last couple of years, especially. So Power Apps is a really great example. So something we noticed had been introduced just when we were playing around with things in January was Microsoft Copilot is pretty much standard on Power Apps. So we were sort of playing around with, okay, I want to just put into the prompt bar, like from an Excel spreadsheet, I want to be able to pull this information and I want to deliver this to person A and person B, who are then going to use it for this. So we were doing a time out of refrigeration app, testing something like that. So we gave it the metrics it needed. And it gave us a pretty good start point. So it came up with wasn't pretty, didn't look great, but it had the columns we needed, it had the buttons we needed, and we didn't really need to do a lot to it. We had somebody who was pretty good at code. He wouldn't call himself a coder or a programmer, though. He was able to just go in the back end and go, okay, well, I just changed this decision tree here, or changed this bracket here, and just change a few things. And we had something that was pretty fit for purpose. In the end, we didn't use it because from a GMP regulatory standpoint, it created too many problems. But it was a real eye-opener as to how anyone could have a go now. And you take that in conjunction with an AI program that has been built by Thermo Fisher and is for use within Thermo Fisher. So it works in very much the same way as ChatGPT. We're able to give it, I want some C+ program language for this solution. So you're actually able to get AI to write your code for you, put that code into something like Power Apps or Power BI or an application similar to that. And you've got a pretty good starting point for making your own solutions. They might not work, they might not fit the regulatory standards, but I think it really gets people's imagination cooking. You know, like, I can do this now. I often get comments like, well, I've never even played a computer game. How am I going to engage with this? And it's like, we've used Excel, right? Like, yeah, you've used Word. Yeah. Well, it's not too far a leap from that now, because in the back end, there's some really clever things going on that used to take people weeks is there instantly. And I find that quite amazing.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Low code is the new Excel. And sure, there's a learning curve on it, but it will get to a stage where everyone in your organization can do a bit of low code development and use that kind of dragging of objects around to build out the application that they want.
Yeah, that sort of node-based decision tree building, I think, is something that most people can get their head around, especially if you're talking about to somebody who's used to the sort of ladder technology like PLCs the engineers work with. That's something they can easily get their head around, because A does B and makes B and C do that, but then when D hits E, it goes back to F, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's something most engineers with shop floor experience can get their head around, you know.
Absolutely. So, Rob, last question. Conscious it's Friday evening. Where are you going to next in Thermo from a digital transformation perspective? Like, what are the big bets that you're making for your next set of innovations?
The big thing we're working on, and it is implemented already, but is evolving, is OEE dashboards, giving us data directly from the shop floor space. So these are nothing new, especially in automotive and fast-moving consumer goods. This sort of technology has been around for a few years now, but in pharmaceuticals, it's a tougher nut to crack because of the GMP regulatory barriers, but also it's quite a complicated procedure getting an injectable drug mixed and into a vial or syringe and so on and so forth. So that's been a project that I've been involved with for the last 2 years. And it's called in people from every part of the business, really, to make that happen. IT, engineering, automation engineering, shop floor operations, and so on. So that's been really good. We made some great leaps and bounds on that in conjunction with Rockwell, PTC and Calypso. They've helped us on that journey. But we've got to a level of maturity with it now where we're starting to think beyond this. So we've got these dashboards, we've got the data, we've got the dashboards, we're making decisions, the 3 big Ds. And that's great. But then with generative AI and machine learning, what can we do that's next level? So as you probably know yourself, these machines kick out a lot of data every minute. And we've got something like 1,000 sensors on one line that's about 5 meters long, giving us all of this data. So what we've done in the first instance is to narrow the focus on the alarms and sensors that are of use to us to make the decisions we need to make. But then all these other sensors and alarms are giving us information that if you give all that to the AI and say, have a look at that, not just on a site level, but on a network level. You've got all these machines working by different vendors, but they're all making the similar kind of product. So the ability for us to take all that information from different vendors, process it into one space, give that to AI and say, look at that, give us trends, give us predictions, tell us what you're going to do with that. So we're going to get to that sweet point of predictive maintenance, firstly. So we already have planned maintenance, so we already have a rough idea of what needs replacing when, and we've got that through years of experience and through working with vendors. They give us that sort of information, but we're actually able to make more informed decisions on when things are potentially about to go wrong. So we can get to a point in the future where the AI is recognizing the monster on the hill before it arrives, ordering the part we need automatically from the person we need to get that part from, and that part arriving and the engineer getting it in their hands maybe a week or a few days before that problem arises. That's the sweet spot we're working towards currently. But that trend data will also give us other valuable information to do with safety as well, and also business decisions that will help us improve tack time and improve output and reduce waste and reduce cost for us as well.
I love it. Brilliant. Rob, well, listen, thank you very much for an engaging conversation. It's been brilliant to learn how digital transformation is being executed at some of the biggest companies in the world, of which Thermo is one. And it's really useful to understand your learning from some of those earlier innovations. But it's interesting to see that even though your Microsoft HoloLens POC didn't pay off dividends initially, that you continue to innovate and take on the latest and greatest technology to see how you can add value to your business. I appreciate having you here today. Thanks very much, Rob.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a genuine pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for tuning in to The Digital Manufacturer. We hope that today's conversation has provided some food for thought or sparked new ideas that will help you on your digital journey. To learn more about any of these topics discussed in the episode, head over to our website, www.rubictech.co. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform to help others join in the digital manufacturing movement. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a future episode. The Digital Manufacturer is brought to you by Rubik, where we're not just talking about the future, we're making it happen. On behalf of everyone at Rubik, thank you for listening.